Hey, I'm Jacob Cooperman, and you were watching the MMA Conspiracy Hour with Todd Atkins and Miguel Iturrate. Todd has been involved in covering combat sports since the 1990s, and Miguel has match-made over 200 different events amongst various promotions worldwide. Please subscribe and be on the lookout for future episodes. As for me, you can check me out at Gloves Up on YouTube and Coop TV with 3 O's on Instagram. Thank you guys, and enjoy the episode.
All right, this is Todd Atkins, and I'm here with Miguel Iturrate, and we're going to be doing another MMA Conspiracy Hour on the latest public documents that have come out in this Mark Hunt case. I think they're more important than people are giving them credit for, I think, maybe because of the way Mark has handled things, perhaps, But I think the documents themselves are maybe even more important than what some of the antitrust stuff was, perhaps. As always, we want to thank our sponsors, Live to Fight and BetStamp. And Miguel, I just want to kind of let you take it away. I know you've read over these. Kind of let me know what you think.
Yeah, there were a couple of pages of stuff that Mark Hunt put out, with some highlights and things like that, talking about, time trails and emails and confirmations and the communications that are, in the public now, between Dana and Brock Lesnar, and how they seem to play this game of, not being forthcoming with what was going on there for whatever reason. There were failed tests. We've known that, in the 10 years since the fight, that the guy failed a test. The trail of communications that Hunt is showing pretty clearly states that, he was lied to, that he was not being told the truth, and he took the company at face value while they were doing shady things behind the scenes, and all driven by the need to get Brock Lesnar into the octagon and the need for them to monetize that character. And like I said, Mark has never been one to mince words, but I think he has a pretty legitimate grievance in that, and I've said before, the earliest contracts in MMA and NHB and stuff like that all had a preliminary, couple of statements like you're the fighter 1, fighter 2, and a little general structure. And one of the structures was, and I'm sure it's still something to this extent in there, is that the guys are taking their lives into their own hands. They know that there is a potential risk of death in this. Just like probably in NASCAR, they have to have something similar because you could smash yourself up against the wall. You know what I mean? But in the case of combat sports, the fighters, they sign the contracts. They don't read that part, in the early days and stuff like that. But that stuff is in there for a reason, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And part of it is that now extend it to the UFC's level of contract at this point. There's got to be some clauses in there that say, performance enhancements are no, we test, we look at these are our policies and things like that. So now when the contract gets signed, the expectation is that it's all in good faith, right? So it doesn't appear that they covered all their bases here. It looks like they entered a mode of that getting the monetization from a guy like Lesnar and the crossover ability there became more important than doing the right thing as a sport. And that's what Mark Hunt's really upset about. You mentioned the antitrust suit, I think these two things go hand in hand. The thing about the problem to me with the antitrust suit is that it played out in the best possible scenario for the UFC. They extended it for 10 years, during which those 10 years they did exactly what they've always done. Money's kept coming in. The Fertittas bailed out with more billions than they had before. And Dana still operates with impunity where, it's his way or the highway still. Like some of the amount of money on the settlement is low in my book. And I'm pretty sure that once the fighters start getting their checks and you start hearing, of the 1,100 fighters, 400 of them got $5,000 each, whatever that number is, those guys can't really, be happy with that. That settlement doesn't do them any good, and again, it's 10%. If you got $5,000 at the end of the settlement, it's 10% of what a bonus is now.
Yep.
It's insignificant amount of money for this company, and they settle for that. And then on top of it, they were, saying, and many of the fighters philosophically, were like, well, they've got to change business practices, and that doesn't appear to have happened at all. And the only person that seems to really continue to be striving to make a big change is Hunt, because I do think that when push came to shove, that the lawyers may be suffering from fatigue or whatever, but this type of documentation was put in public knowledge, right? This is, I forget what it's called in legal terms, but like, okay, they had to release emails and stuff like that. So here's the thing is now you've got 10 years of email. Now you have to sit and read 10 years worth of emails. And that is, that's where the lawyers, are going to justify saying, yeah, we get a big chunk of the settlement because, we have to hire clerks and X to do all that, organize it. Here are the emails from May of 2014, April of 2014, March of 2014, all organized with trails and things like that, so that they can actually build a case of a paper trail. And that's the one part where I feel like that is where the lawyers may have taken the easy way out with the settlement and not gotten into the nitty gritty there, because I believe that there will probably be some kind of evidence there of monopoly, collusion, dirty business tactics of, going after competition, buying out competition, or, freezing out competition, or stealing fighters or talent from other competition or whatever. I can't believe that the company there, every sign is that they would probably have operated with the type of arrogance that, yes, they sent emails. They sent emails. They say if what we hear or what we're told, there may even be phone conversations, tapes of all those of many conversations and things. I'll tell you, I worked for a couple of sport books here in Costa Rica, and some of the guys, including Calvin at one point, but some of the guys are at odds with the U.S. government over the gambling back in those days. Now, the laws have changed and things like that, and the business is different. But some of those guys were wanted by the feds, the FBI. They couldn't go to the States or anything like that. I had one occasion where the guy owned property in the States, and I was going with his cousin to the property, and he needed to get some money that was hidden, stashed away in a fucking fireplace. And me and his cousin were going to bring it back to Costa Rica. He needed cash to operate. This is not even big money. We were each carrying less than $10,000. But in order to have a conversation with us where he told us where the money was in the house and things like that, he drove at night with us to the airport. We stood at the far end of the runway where the planes are literally going over our head. We were told not to bring any cell phones, not to bring anything of that nature. And then that's when he communicated to us that the details of where the money was and how he wanted us to bring it back and this, that, and the other stuff. That's maybe ultra paranoid, maybe, you know, but if his cell phone is tapped, he can't talk on his cell. You know, your cell phone is being recorded. Your emails will later become part of a trail. So it's not like he sent you an email. It's like, well, you know, move the fireplace and you know, he wanted to talk in privacy and make sure that nobody could hear him by any means necessary. And I don't think that the UFC, in their 20 years of building up that business, could operate that way all the time. That there is going to be some type of evidence there. Like Bob Mazy talked a little bit about it. He during our interview with him, he spoke to us about the email that Joe Silva sent with the title "We Own MMA." Yeah, you know, and Joe may have at some point realized that, you know, maybe being succinct in emails and not leaving huge paper trails or anything like that. But again, with the rankings and things that they were talking about in that email, so what was all the emails that led to them? I believe it came sometime after Strikeforce was purchased, and what that did was that it took most of the top 15 fighters in every weight class across the world and put them all on the same roster. So there have to be emails about, you know, what are we going to do with Kung Lee? Kung Lee's over at Strikeforce, and, you know, he's crawling into the top 10. How are we going to get him? You know, Kung Lee was one of the central figures in the lawsuit. You know, so he knows his value. He knows he was undervalued when he went over to the UFC. And I don't think that paper trail was sufficiently examined or looked at. And because of that, the settlement appeared cheap to me. Hunt looks like he's actually wanted to do the homework, have his lawyers do the homework on his particular aspects of the case, and we'll see what he gets out of it. We'll see what he gets out of it. But here's a situation where, you know, 1,000 or 1,100 guys are going to split up 250 million. You know, what's the maximum guy going to get out of that couple 100 million? You know, Hunt, in an offer of a settlement, they could come in, swoop in, and say, "Here, Hunt, look, shut up. Here's 50 million." Will Hunt turn down 50 million, which would be, you know, 25% or 20% of the total settlement and the other bigger lawsuit? The UFC's already shown that they can get away with underpaying. So will he take 5 million? Will he take 3 million? Will he take $1 million? What is it going to take from Mark Hunt, or is Mark Hunt going to pursue this the way he says he's going to pursue it? Which is what the fighters and the lawyers in the antitrust suit were always saying until push came to shove and the money showed up. So yeah, it's also evidence of like a real lack of you know, like they do what they want. It's not a sport. And when people say it's not a sport, it's not a sport. In that the desperation to take a guy like Lesnar and use his name and recognition and name value to monetize was it borders almost on desperation. Like they have to do this, or it just has to be done. And there are always options. You know, some of them are, yeah, you're going to make a little less money. And that doesn't seem to be an option here. But, you know, like, you know, put it this way. I assure you that when the Chicago Bulls, 2-3 years after Jordan and Pippen were retired, they were making a hell of a lot less money. That's business. That's, you know, you can't force, and with Lesnar and the pro wrestling people too, they all know, like, pro wrestling's got such a long and storied career. Back in the 60s and 70s, a lot of people believe that was real fighting. There's many examples of. I think Jerry the King Lawler pile drive to Andy Kaufman on television. I think Dr. David Schultz, one of the wrestlers, pimp slapped a reporter for telling him it was fake, for questioning their toughness or whatever it was. And those guys really took it seriously. They still don't have to admit that it's fake outside the United States in certain areas because of laws and things. But here, they were like, okay, they were faced with being forced to regulate like a sport. And that's when they said, no, we're not the World Wrestling Federation. We're World Wrestling Entertainment. And we do follow a script and stuff like that. Now, with the guys there, what that does is now they're not athletes, they're actors. And now you can continue to do the steroid thing and continue. And Vince McMahon has had a long career with steroids. And he himself has at times looked certainly like an user. He delved into bodybuilding leagues and things like that where, there are bodybuilding leagues and then there are the clean bodybuilding leagues. Why is that? Because the other ones are dirty. Everybody uses steroids in those types of situations. And the bottom line is the UFC also had, at some point, Joe Silva was pretty famous for it, where, you got to look like a fighter too. The eye test is very important for you to not come in, overweight or, kind of, on the smaller side or whatever. You guys got to really look like athletes. So, I think Lesnar is just one of those guys that they make new rules for. And, hopefully Mark Hunt exposes that a little bit, but we'll see what the consequences are suffered. I doubt that there'll be many huge ones.
Now, I want to touch a little bit because we did talk about, or you did talk about that they didn't get any changes. So let's go over what they did get, and then we'll get more into this Hunt thing because I want you to comment on some of these because they are on the record. So let's talk about them. So for the next 5 years, the exclusive negotiating period is to last no longer than 30 days. I think it was a year before, right? So that's a pretty big difference. But only for the next 5 years. The matching period lasts no longer than 4 months. I think the exclusive period was 90 days. The matching period was a year, is what I think it was. And then third one, if a fighter declines a bout and the contract gets extended as a result, the UFC has to offer fighter a new opponent as their next bout offer. I would think they were doing that anyway, but I don't know.
Well, they probably did to certain people on the roster. All right, you don't want to fight the wrestler, we'll give you this guy, and like that. But once you got yourself to a position where you were becoming a big star, or you were in a situation where they wanted you to fight somebody specific for their reasons, then they could hold it over your head.
Oh yeah, say, you're right.
Well, there's no other opponent for you. Sorry, that's it. It's either him or you wait.
Yeah.
And so they've limited some of that.
And there's two more. If a fighter retires while under contract, they are free agents after 4 years of such retirement. I think that's too long. Anyway, I think they should be a free agent after 2 years or something like that, or a year even.
When did Khabib retire?
A long time ago, But
maybe it's 4 years already.
And then the last one is fighters retain some limited name, image, and likeness rights while under contract. I don't think they had any before.
No.
And so that's a pretty big one. Now, this is something I want to ask you about. It says in the next week or two, fighters will be receiving notice about the proposed settlement and its terms. They will have a right to speak up if they have any objections. I think they should ask for more in these business practices, at least. I don't know. Maybe they could ask for more money, but the business practices, I think they could get something.
Yeah.
Am I crazy to think that? I mean, what do they have to lose? Why not ask for it?
Yeah, no. I think that something I think it's precisely the business practices where the UFC is going to draw the line now. And what you've just read out really, after 20 years of them leaving absolutely no competition out there, what does it matter if you're retired and you wait 4 years when there's no other company out there who's really going to sign you?
Right.
What does it matter if that your contract runs out, now you've got a short period of time to work out when there is no competition and you can't really, I guess the PFL, is there,
Right.
with Bellator and some semblance of that. Then you've got, maybe, a company here or there, one, and things like that. But on a roster of 700 fighters, you're talking about those clauses affecting very, very few people. What in its heyday, when Bellator was actively trying to grab UFC talent, when they had Bonner and Tito and Quentin Jackson and all kinds of people visited the roster. Ken Shamrock, so they were when at its peak of them actually having to deal with fighters going to another organization. How many actually really signed? Maybe 10, 12, 15 guys overall over the course of a few years and stuff. So that's not really going to be a big, those aren't big game changers. The UFC appears to be seeding something. But again, because there, unless the PFL says, all right, we'd like to test that clause and we're going to look at over the next couple of years trying to sign 200-300 guys off of it, out there that are free agents. Then you would see a bunch of fighters go, okay, let me go ahead and test the market here. Let me wait, not sign a new contract and wait for them, for me to get a contract. Then then the UFC can try to match it. They've got all kinds of things like that going on, but it's not going to have a huge effect. There may be a couple of fighters, and the PFL, for whatever smoke and mirrors you want to call them, they're running their league right now kind of in Europe. It's not, big in the States. I guess they're paying or making sure that they're front page news on SureDog and some of the websites there so that their fighters and fights get some visibility. But where's Ngannou? Where's Ngannou? The last we heard from Ngannou was that he's not sure he wanted to do MMA, was thinking maybe he should stick with boxing. And then he disappeared. They had an opponent. I gave him kudos for saying, okay, the heavyweight tournament winner is the guy that Ngannou has to face. I forget the guy's name. He was a big 6'8" Brazilian guy. Presented, maybe some type of intrigue, even though zero name value. And yeah, Ngannou's not going to do that fight. So,
Yep.
when the PFL's major move of the last year has exploded in their face and they're not going to get any fight out of the guy, at least they don't have to pay him, right? So that's a savings for them. Again, this is the part of it is Bob Meyerowitz and the Fertittas, to a certain extent, and many of the early companies, companies backed by guys like Dan Lambert, myself included. I spent my own money. John Peretti spent $100,000 of his own money. Running the Contenders, and who knows how much else he spent on other things trying to get his shows running, right? Don Davis is not, he goes to Qatar and drums up money and gets investors and things like that. He's not spending his own money, desperately trying to make this thing happen. So, yeah, they asked Qatar for money or whoever their investment money was that helped him sign Ngannou, and now it turns out that they're probably that $10 million fight. How about didn't Ngannou was like, well, I got my opponent a good payday too. Yeah. You know what, Francis? So you actually have to fight for your opponent to get that pay as well. So there's nothing positive about the PFL's like signature move that people heard about over the last, whatever. When they tried to put themselves on the map, that was the move that they made, was to sign Ngannou. Now, with all that kind of not coming to fruition, what fighter do you think would say, yeah, I want to go, I want to go to the PFL? Maybe there are guys who are doing it. They look at it and say, okay, I got to win 3 fights for $1 million. I think I got a chance because their talent and my talent is a good fit. I'm going to be one of the guys at least making it to the finals. And, even if I run maybe into a tournament, I could go in a couple of years in a row. I think Kayla Harrison, she won a couple of tournaments for him, right? So she banked $1 million a couple of times. Where's she now?
I've always wondered how the payouts work for that. We've never really seen anyone say, yeah, I got $1 million this way, or they gave me $1 million check. I wonder how that works.
I think it's probably that you get,
yeah, but if you won a couple of those, why are you still fighting?
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, 2 million. First of all, the number of guys that won 2 of them, $1 million isn't what it was when we were kids.
Right, but it's a lot more than a lot of them have. Even guys in the UFC will never make $1 million. Most of them.
Well, here's the thing.
Majority of them.
Now, it's interesting, but take a guy like Max Holloway.
He has, yeah.
Okay, and that's the thing or Cerrone. If you're a guy that, even Kevin Holland's got to be crawling up on having a few $1 million in income at this point because, you get 100, you get yourself, you're 80. Okay, you made 160, 90. Now, it does start to add up to a certain point where the UFC says, they've got, now, granted, their guys will never make that roster.
Right. I mean, most of them don't last more than
and then
10 fights at the most.
So people have been told, but like I said, Kayla Harrison probably took home after paying trainers and taxes and things like that, say $500,000. What can you really do with $500,000? It's not like I'm going to buy an island and I'm going to retire. You know what I mean? It's like you got to keep working, keep fighting. And in the case of an athlete, where, she can't be like, well, I'll be fighting at 55. You know what I mean? I'll still be making money. No, you've got a small window. So, yeah, even $1 million and that's what at the end of the day, that's really all it was on the PFL's part, is a gimmick of throwing out that $1 million moniker, and saying, hey, the winner of the tournament, they asked for a lot of work. 3 fights. There's probably a couple of dozen fighters in the UFC that with 3 fights get close to $1 million, especially if you consider that they're getting money from Venom, whatever sponsors are trickled in there. And at some point, like for example, with the MMA Collector, we looked at trying to get some of the UFC guys to do some appearances, maybe to sign posters and things like that. And, even retired fighters were asking for, $15,000 to show up for a couple of hours. So, not everybody gets that kind of money, but you're probably talking about guys that in a year to 18-month time period in the UFC, they probably have a couple of dozen guys that are going to be making close to $1 million. Fight 3 times, just like the PFL asked you, and you're getting there. Oliveira is not a champion anymore, but he had gotten himself to a certain, he didn't get bounced back to making 20 and 20 for his fights. You know, he
Yeah, I
hasn't been
mean,
as
there's. I'm not saying there's not, you know, a decent amount of guys who've done well, but over the entirety,
No,
I'd like
there's-
to see the numbers on how many guys make it past their first contract without getting cut.
Yeah.
I'd like to see that because
Right,
I think it's probably higher the guys that don't than do.
oh yeah, for sure. I
Yeah.
mean, keep in mind that it's been 15 years, probably. Maybe it's closer to 18 now, right?
Mm-hmm.
But with the Tough TV show, and let's not mince words. The Tough TV show was like you get $100,000 contract. You know, yeah. So what that meant was some of the guys 6-6 to 8-8, and they had to fight 4 times to make $100,000. And then with the Dana White Contender Series, now you get into an entry level contract with the UFC, and you're maybe making 10-10 at the start. Again, this is 5 times more money than back in the old days when they got 2-2. So that's what the UFC can always hang their hat on semantics is there are very few jobs or anything like that where you will be making where we've gotten 5 times more money to the employees or to the contract workers or whatever. But again, nobody at the entry level makes a decent contract except for like a guy like Brock Lesnar. Tim Sylvia told me that a part of Tim Sylvia is a former UFC 2-time heavyweight champion, and at one point he left the UFC and went and fought, Fedor and grabbed some big paydays out of Japan and out of I think maybe was it Strikeforce where he fought Fedor?
I don't recall.
I forget. It was. Oh no, I'm sorry. Affliction.
Yeah, Affliction.
Yeah, it was Affliction. But he grabbed some decent paydays, especially for the time, where the UFC was like, well, you're gonna have to take 100 and 100, and he got better paydays than those with another company. Now you tell me what other company is going to offer you 100 and 100 to go and fight. There's nobody on the board now for that. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see what kind of additional news and pressures the UFC has to deal with. But I don't see the structure of the sport out there. Even Japan doesn't have a comparable MMA company like Pride, where fighters used to be able to say, I'll go over there and get a couple of paydays or whatever. Even Risen, which I guess is the biggest company now.
Ryzen.
Yeah, I just say they're not on the level that the sport was before.
Did you see they got Manny Pacquiao fighting Chihiro Suzuki in Super Ryzen on July 28th? Chihiro Suzuki's one of their bigger MMA stars, and he's going to fight Manny Pacquiao on July 28th
in MMA or bare knuckle.
I think it's going to be a boxing, maybe. I don't know. I'd have to go back and look. I think it's going to be boxing though. Yeah.
With gloves.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, they've
look.
Apparently, they've got 40,000 already booked for that event, which is back up to the Pride numbers that Saitama. They're doing the stadium style for Saitama Super Arena because Saitama has 3 different capacities, and I think they're doing max for this, and it's already done. So,
well, wasn't it 60,000 that they could fit?
I'm not sure, but they're doing the stadium level. So they've got 40,000, which is more than the UFC pulls in most of their arenas. Dana doesn't like to do more than 25, he says, because of the vision, which I get. I think that's understandable for the fans. At some point, you're seeing guys that are this big, for that far away, or having to watch the screen. So I get what he's saying there. But that's back. They're getting back up to what they were at, with Pride for some of these shows.
Again, I don't know if I see it that way. I think they are able to every once in a while get attention like that, but not in that sustained way that Pride did, Shockwave and, then New Year's Eve and, then the big Grand Prix shows.
But you
And
got to
like,
remember, COVID crushed Japan. They weren't letting anybody in for like 2 years.
yeah,
So all their fights were Japanese versus Japanese, which the fans didn't want to see anyway. That's
yeah,
not how Pride got to where they were. They got that way by having nationalists, guys beating foreigners,
yeah,
having someone like Sakuraba being one of the better fighters in the world.
that's what they haven't
Yeah.
managed to get back to, is that the interesting part of, and we talked about this with Zach the other day, is that the interesting part about what Japan had going on from the mid 80s on was that there was a knowledge of what real fighting was that was in practice, whether you liked it or not. Shudo took, it came from one of the UWFI, I think, one of the old pro wrestling leagues. But those guys had, guys that knew the fighting from the Carl Gotch style guys there. And then all the young guys, you can take it or leave it, like it or not. Maeda formed Rings, and Rings at one point was one of the biggest shows. Pride took Takada. Those guys, and now all of a sudden they were splintered. And you had Shudo, and then you had Pancrase, where they had Funaki and Suzuki in Pancrase. And then the Shudo people consider themselves even more purists because they accused some of the other guys as doing works, and they were never able to work together. But those guys all had developed stars at one point that could fight on the world level. They haven't made a Japanese star who could compete on the world level. Not, Aoki.
They got one guy who's in the UFC now who's doing really good. I forgot his name, but he two of them actually. So they got
What was his name?
They got two of them that are undefeated. I'm trying to remember the one he's getting up there in the ranks.
What classes?
God dang it! I'm trying to remember names. I don't remember names like when you get old, you don't remember names as well as you know. But I think
I know
Tyro, or remember that guy who's kind of a lighter weight guy. Let me look his name up.
Here's the thing: is he's not in a Japanese company, and he's not on the face.
Tatsuro Taira.
Okay.
And I think he's let's see what his record is now in the UFC. He hasn't lost a fight, I know that.
Once he's gotten to a certain level, they have to come to the UFC, and that's where they can prove themselves. They're not fighting on a Japanese company or being pushed as the face of a Japanese company like Sakuraba was with Pride, and with Takada handing off to Sakuraba, and Rings always had Maeda. I mean, and Maeda is a controversial figure, right?
Yeah.
And people accuse him of working fights at times or stuff like that, but they were always pushing the envelope, trying to do big things. Now these companies, the big thing is to get a guy good enough to go to the UFC. And that's sort of what happens there. I mean, Maeda fought what's the name of the gigantic Karelin in a supposed work match or in a match in Rings and stuff like that. But you know how much money they probably had to pay Karelin to do that 1-0 to go 0-1 in MMA? So that type of creativity is not there, Again, and with Pride, they had Nogueira, they had Fedor, they had Crow Cop, and Bob Sapp, creations like that always generated huge interest. You don't see the Japanese market making guys like that anymore.
Right. So Tyra's 5-0 in the UFC, and then they got one other guy who's a really good wrestler that he's also undefeated in the UFC. I'm trying to remember his name, but I just saw him fight recently, actually. But they have a couple of guys that are doing pretty well in the UFC right now. But like you said, to me, sending guys to the UFC isn't what made Pride great. Pride was, we're here, we're not here to play second fiddle to anybody, and
Right.
that's where they need to get to. Not saying, because I saw yesterday that, we were talking about this on the Ryzen Discord, and some guys are saying that Sakaki Bar was going to announce that so and so from Ryzen was going to be going to the UFC. But I was like, that's not a big announcement. You don't want to be saying you're going to let somebody fulfill their UFC dream. No, we're here. We're not playing second fiddle to anybody. Japan is back.
Yeah,
That's what they need to get to.
that's not there. They haven't sustained the ability. Like I said, those generational guys from the mid '80s on took their time at least nurturing a new generation of guys, like all the Shudo guys that, we got Sakurai and Sato and Uno and other guys there. It's because they were taught by a previous generation. And those guys haven't kept up their end of the bargain by actually having gyms in schools and passing on, creating fight teams and doing things like that. There is no culture of that. Not on a national level where, like I said, Aoki, Okami, Sexyama, that's really the last generation of fighters that were international from Japan.
Yeah, Kaya Asakura was the latest one who signed with the UFC, and they announced that on Ryzen's show, which I don't like it, but their reasoning, what some of these guys are saying is Ryzen is kind of saying, look, you can come here and we won't get in the way. If you get big enough, we won't get in the way of you going to the UFC. But to me, it's like, we won't get in the way of us playing second fiddle ultimately. And I don't like that.
Yeah, no. Like I said, though, the problem there is that they don't have the roster. We're talking about 2 Japanese guys. You know what I mean? We're talking about 2 Japanese guys. You needed to have 60 or 80 guys of a high level in order to sustain a big show. And that's just not in existence anymore over there.
Yeah. Let's talk about, I know we covered a couple things here, but I want to read Hunt's documents, the highlighted parts at least. So, because that was the main title of our thing. So let's start with maybe the shorter one first.
Sure.
Or now I'll go from the start. So this is the shortest highlighted part. So the text messages that demonstrate Dana White and Brock Lesnar made the arrangement for him to fight in the UFC 200 during March 21st to March 23, 2016. That's when they made the arrangement.
Okay.
And it says here, the text message from Lesnar to White on March 22nd, 2016 confirmed he had permission from Vince McMahon. Then USADA entered Lesnar's details into the testing pool from April 1st, 2016. And this was continually misrepresented as Lesnar not having entered the testing pool until June 6, 2016. So I guess they weren't truthful about when, they had made it look like he had entered in April, but he didn't, apparently. And then it says on April 9th, 2016, when Lesnar requested for White to send him to UFC without letting on to anybody, to send him UFC gear without telling anybody is what it was. During May 2016, when UFC 200 PR photo shoot was arranged with Lesnar via text message. On May 21st, 2016, when White and Lesnar texted each other about the UFC 200 fight roster being placed on the internet, and Lesnar states, hopefully we don't let this cat out of the bag until we let it. And then it says on May 27th, when Mark Hunt messages White on Twitter and White misleads Hunt, stating he has not found him an opponent yet, which is understandable. He doesn't want it to get out, or maybe he doesn't want Hunt to know who he's fighting, and that too. But on June 6th, Jeff Nowitzki circulates an email with 3 USADA staff directing how they should manage the optics around the extraordinarily applied Lesnar exemption when it is announced. So they gave him a TRT or whatever exemption. And then it's saying between June 7th to June 9th, 2016, when Hunt messages White on Twitter requesting explanation for the exemption granted to Lesnar, and White replies that he had to do so in order to get the deal done with him. So maybe let's stop there for a second because there's a couple more, but maybe comment on that so far.
Yeah. Again, what you see here is you see that Lesnar is a guy getting some type of different or special treatment. To me, what is if they have him and he's signed and they've got Vince's permission, and one of the other emails over there also mentions how one of the Fertitta brothers was kind of playing overlord on it too, and they needed his blessing or something like that. If the match is signed and you're ready, what are they hiding? What are they keeping back there? And it may be, from some of the evidence that probably he needed time to have the USADA people, get clean for him. And again, the desperation of the need to get Lesnar in there, at the end of the day, shows that money trumps everything, and again, Lesnar is a guy that got special treatment. Hunt doesn't like it. There are you could tell Hunt's no dummy. Hunt's got a long career. And if they look, we have an opponent for you. We can't tell you exactly who it is, but we're all set. It's going to be something huge. Or even tell him and have him sign a document that he can't release that to anybody. So, yeah, I think he feels mistreated. And that they were trying to work things out to give Lesnar a lot of advantages, going into the fight. And Lesnar is a guy who also, kind of gets what he wants kind of thing. So, yeah, I just think on a case-by-case basis of the 1,100 fighters in the testing pool, there's probably similar trails of just bad representation, bad behavior, consent, things like that, where fighters were mistreated, and that happened over and over to them. Well, if you're not taking this fight, how many times did they tell a guy, well, if you're not taking this fight, you've got 9 months left on your contract, we're going to sit on it. I need you to fight this guy, and that's the only option we have. Again, I think Mark Hunt is doing a service to the sport by bringing this stuff to light. I think that's one of the disservices that was done by taking the settlement as quickly as they did, is that it kept a lot of stories like this just out of the spotlight.
Yeah.
What does the paper trail actually show is probably very damning at some point.
Yeah, I think the other two things are going to be more of that when we read this, where it kind of shows the collusion, so to speak. So maybe I'll kind of get to this now. So So on June 8, 2016, when Lesnar directs the It's Time podcast interviewer, Paul Heyman, is in an email thread to not discuss that he has been in training already and express himself with a laughing my ass off emoji or whatever, discussing how they manipulated the narrative to suit the appellee's agenda versus Hunt's detriment, to Hunt's detriment. Now, this is where it kind of gets a little bit more. On July 27, 2016, when Nowitzki emails Christina Denning and Hunt to falsely declare that Lesnar has been subject of out-of-competition testing and no advance notice testing. He states, despite having granted Lesnar the extraordinary exemption from testing until June, and even though USADA discovery shows Lesnar was entered into the testing pool April 1st, 2016, and in addition to the fact that Lesnar made an agreement to fight at UFC 220 March 2016. Further, the fact that testing was delayed until June also equates to providing advance notice being given to Lesnar. On October 27, 2022, when White prepares himself during his video deposition and states that he has no knowledge of Lesnar's exemption. On December 7, 2022, when Lesnar perjures himself during the video deposition and states that he has never used performance-enhancing drugs in breach of contract. And then the last part, it says, when the appellees routinely state that Lesnar tested clean 6 times prior to UFC 200 and admit that 2 of Lesnar's test results returned positive for banned substances prior to UFC 200, the assertion by the appellees in their answering brief on May 8, 2024, that the new reason why there was a delay to announcing Lesnar for UFC 200 was that apparently they awaited Lorenzo Fertitta's oversight, like you had mentioned. And then this is the last part. The fact that he relied on those assurances that were the equivalent of a volume of misrepresentations that misled Hunt is the very basis of having relied that many falsehoods to his detriment. So I think that's the more damning part.
Yeah. Like I said, look, that Lesnar, who knows what legal semantics are going to go on there, and that he never was in breach of a contract while taking steroids. So anyway, he was going to be positive. He stopped doing them, signs the contract, so he stopped, but he's still going to be positive for a certain period of time. Who knows exactly what the semantics of that are? But Lesnar is a guy Lesnar is a guy that they considered his marketability, and they look at all the hoops they go through. And then again, when Dana says he has no idea about an exemption being done and stuff, he's always sort of done that, where it's like USADA, he used to be mad at them, deal with them, and then at some point he would, he kind of washed his hands up. Maybe it was around this time where he was saying, hey, it's somebody else's job. I don't want to deal with this stuff anymore.
Yeah. But I mean, that's probably the more, I would say, damning portion. Him being misled prior to the fight, that stuff happens in the fight game for everybody, I would say. But them letting him use steroids and, purposely not. Now, I do remember Hunt saying back then that he wasn't worried about fighting Lesnar, whether he was on steroids or not. And that might come back to bite him ultimately. But, the other thing that I'm a little confused by is Hunt keeps saying, okay, on this date, we're going to have something. That date comes and goes, nothing. Then he says, on this date, we're going to have something. That date comes and goes, nothing. So it's a little bit confusing as to where, at least with the antitrust lawsuit, as things were starting to get rolling, we knew what date something, all that kind of stuff. So that's part's a little bit, I don't know what's going on, so.
Yeah, I think Hunt, standing alone on this lawsuit is one of the things that, gave the antitrust lawsuit a little bit more power. Maybe was that there was 1,100 fighters that signed up to it, and were trying to get something done. Now, if the UFC was able to suffer practically zero consequences from the 1,100 guys, then I don't think that Hunt is facing a tall order in order for him to actually get any traction or juice here. The date slipped by. The UFC, maybe just, hey, we need a delay, and they send a couple of $1,000 an hour lawyers into the court with a briefing made so that they ask for a delay, and lo and behold, Hunt's not been able to back up every statement he's said. I like his confidence. I do believe that we've seen that the UFC, here's a good example of them again, but we've known it. We know it. It's all they care about is money. Lesnar was the cash cow that was getting them big money there. It also, in many ways, now the WWE and the UFC were briefly, companies together marching arm in arm. And I think that, you start to see the possibility of that back when these deals were being cut. So, yeah, again, what they're willing to do for money is anything. So, Lesnar, as a guy, I mean, he was champion. He's a freakish athlete with or without steroids. And the bottom line is still, you shouldn't be catering to him just because he can make you money. He should have been forced to, have 5 or 10 fights. Even Cody Garbrandt had 10 fights before he got a title shot, right? They fast track guys now. Lesnar was in a title shot in his earliest fights. And that in and of itself, the fact that the guy was, Couture was old, and Couture was a guy that was a lot smaller. So you're already slanted towards giving him certain advantages with matchmaking and things like that. And, and like with Overeem, they found out, with Mir, to a certain extent, they found out that, Lesnar's a guy that they could only roll out they were never going to be able to make him have 20 fights or anything like that, because at the end of the day, if he doesn't have some advantages and some things going his way, like I said, with the Overeem fight, I think you saw a fighter versus a guy who thinks he wants to be a fighter, who thinks it's good for his image so that he makes some money. But there was a difference there in the makeup.
Right. I want to ask you this, since we just talked about, we've talked a little bit about the antitrust suit and the pending approval or whatever. Do you think the fighter should just say this isn't enough money? Or do you think they've already agreed with the lawyers and this is pretty much a done deal?
Well, I don't know. I don't know exactly how that's going to work. The fight, I do think that the money in the settlement is not sufficient. That the UFC is not going to be stressed out over any of that. So, with that in mind, I think the fact that some guys, I don't know how many percent, what percentage of the fight, but the fact that some guys are going to walk out of this with $5,000 is absurd. These guys, I don't know what the right figure is, because obviously when we were speculating, we were way off. But there are some guys in there that are probably part of the lawsuit that could really use more than $5,000. Guys that walked out of the UFC after laying it on the line there. And, Spencer Fisher's a guy that comes to mind, for example. At the end of the day, Spencer walked out without all his faculties, which affects him in many ways. So maybe the idea of like running a gym and running a business and things like that, may not be able to do that anymore. He kind of left it in the ring. So now all of a sudden, he's back living, a lifestyle that, based on the performances and the way he fought and things like that, you think that the UFC would care more. There are a lot of guys in the, I think there, obviously you can't protect everybody. There are probably, there have been stories of NBA players that wind up on the streets and, because they can't manage their money, or, they're not making great life choices and stuff like that. But I think the sheer volume of guys that left the UFC without a nest egg at all is something that the lawsuit should have tried to take care of and address better.
But I mean, the fighters don't have anything. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how all these legal semantics work, but maybe the lawyers could say, look, we can show that we've accepted this settlement, but behind the scenes, we want all of you to say this isn't enough. And then see what happens. Because the worst thing, what's the worst thing to have? Judge says, nope, it's enough. We're done. But if they all band together and said, no, it's not enough.
Yeah.
We don't agree with this amount. But then the judge would say, well, how did you guys even come to these terms then if you didn't agree? So it's hard. I don't know how that would work. But to me, the fighters, it isn't enough. So the fighters should all band together and say it's not enough.
The one part that is not clear here is, how does this number come up? How was that number? Was it like the UFC came in and said, here's the number? And was there a back and forth where they were like, no, it's got to go up? They offered 200 first, and then the negotiating got it up to 330. So, or was the UFC's number, hey, this is what we got, and the lawyers were like, okay, and that's it? Is because, yeah, it looks like a low number, especially once you get to the guys. They eliminated foreign guys. They eliminated guys, that signed certain clauses that are questionable clauses in the contract.
Right.
So very much of a situation where, Hunt is marching to his own lawsuit, and probably because he's not exactly in tune with the big lawsuit. I don't think that lawsuit was satisfying to Hunt at all.
Yeah. So kind of to wrap this up, I mean, again, we aren't lawyers. We don't know what's going to happen. But do you think anything's going to come out of this Hunt appeal?
Yeah. Yeah, I think at the end of the day that the UFC will probably send him some money, and he'll be advised again. If the UFC says, hey, here's $5 million, this lawsuit has not been a 10-year lawsuit. This lawsuit has not been a long, drawn out process of things. So, but his lawyers are still going to get 30% of the settlement. So, they toss $5 million out there. Mark gets to keep 3. The lawyers keep 2.
I've heard his girlfriend is like his representative or something.
Okay. And then you can see why, there's a little bit more emotion and a little bit more work that's going into this. Yeah. Like I said, there's just a lot of what you should have seen with the UFC, emails, details. This is the case of this guy. This is the case of this guy. This is the case of this guy. In particular, these emails, these are very damning to the UFC when they said, this in particular. The only detail of any communications within the company that we've gotten out of all that was, we own MMA email. Other than that, was I supposed to be the guy who goes out there and reads all the emails just to put that stuff together for you? No, I think that the lawsuit should have been taking care of some of that. And I think they left an incredible amount of damning information untouched, unlooked at, unused in the lawsuit.
No, I think the UFC didn't want that stuff to come to light too.
Right.
Yeah.
That's precisely why it should come to light.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. The only thing, like I said, that's frustrating me is Hunt's case. We really don't know anything about anything as far as the pace of what can we expect to win. That's pretty frustrating.
Yeah. No, I like I said, he's standing alone, and he's kind of at times, like I mentioned, and I'm not putting him down, but he's handling things with emotion. He's not the greatest legal mind that we've ever seen operating. So yeah, I think that what we saw with the lawsuit, the big lawsuit from the UFC, was a lack of fear. Like they were never worried about it. And I think that this is even less of a threat to them. At the end of the day, Mark may get some type of something that satisfies him or makes him at least receive something for the trouble and for the, you know, the being wronged because he, for what they do there. But at the end of the day, the UFC isn't going to be broken by it. So yeah, he's standing alone and he's hopefully going to get something, but I don't have a lot of faith that the UFC's behavior is going to change or that you're going to get anything different. These guys have never been worried about these types of things. They count on, and now with the new corporation over the Fertitas, I think that once again their legal team is always going to be the strongest. And unfortunately, in American courts, it usually comes down to that. Can I exhaust an opponent? How his girlfriend might be a lawyer. She might be a very good lawyer, but again, she's got to have teams of people working with her, and to sustain a big lawsuit like this against the UFC, who could just send in, oh, we need a delay for 3 more months. We need a delay for 3 more months, and just wear you out. She could go back to practicing law where her customers are actually going to pay her. Whereas now she might be doing, the work in hope of getting something so that the settlement looks good. So it's just Mark Hunt standing alone is a noble act on his part. And again, you think what would be great is if the courts would let things be settled like, okay, guess what? Mark, you're going to get a little bit of money, whatever that money is. Here's some money, but you're going to get 10 minutes in a bathroom with Dana White. Just beat the out of him.
One thing I did allude to a long time ago, though, before they sold the UFC, and you kind of made mention of this today, they weren't very tight on what they were doing. You know what I mean? That's why there's all these emails are out there. They weren't trying to hide or cover their tracks. I'm sure they do that now. But they weren't doing it then, and that was for many years. So who knows what else is out there?
Yeah, I think that's the one part that you hoped more would come to light, and it didn't. But from Dana's attitude and arrogance, I think that we're still being woefully misinformed of all the conduct. And if it's not out there, we should know it too. It's like, look, we've been through 15 years worth of this company's emails, and the evidence of them being a monopoly is just not there. Okay, then guess what? Fantastic. But I think there's probably evidence that's been left to the benefit of the UFC.
Yep. We've seen evidence as it relates to antitrust, but they've had a number of bad fallouts over the years with different people. Code Tour, Tito, the list goes on and on and on. So, and those guys probably aren't under any kind of contractual agreement not to seek damages.
Yeah, just again, like Monty.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that the situation with the lawsuit, Joe Gold.
Yep.
These are people that had business around the fight that was crushed because of the UFC's work. And they were always external to the lawsuit. The lawsuit wasn't going to deal with that. Right. So what has these guys have to take action on their own? Well, again, good luck. Joel, Monty might have a little bit of money, but I'm sure he doesn't want to spend it all on lawyers. And again, that's what you're going to do if you go to sue this company. So, yeah, good luck to Mark Hunt, man. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, it'll be interesting for sure. Miguel, as always, appreciate your insight, and we like to let you talk about the MMA Collector and the dog rescue. So maybe give us some updates on both of those.
Yeah, time goes on, marching to the beat of doing what we got to do. The dogs are out there. I was waiting last week for a 1-month-old puppy, and It went right to the shelter. I thought I might have to deal with it in my house for a little while, but I didn't have to. So that's one of the good things with being associated with good people, is that there's some infrastructure there. I've got 3 older dogs and 2 dogs from the neighbor that we deal with. So bringing a puppy here was going to be a stressful thing. So kind of glad that didn't quite work out, and it worked out to the benefit of the dog as well. And then the MMA collector, trying to line up interviews, getting work done there, and just MMA Collector 74 on YouTube. Check it out.
Yeah, MMA Collector 74. Miguel's been doing a lot of great history stuff on this channel, and should definitely check it out if you're one of the guys who's kind of in the old school, or maybe someone who's new school that wants to learn about the history of this sport, which is pretty interesting. So he's been doing a lot of hard work there. So definitely check it out. And as always, we appreciate your support on this channel and the MMA Conspiracy Hour. We got some gear out, which I'll put in the notes as well. And for MMA Conspiracy Hour gear, if you want to buy some. And
cool.
And as always, we appreciate the support, and be on the lookout for new episodes. And until next time, see you later.
Live to Fight is the type of company that Dana killed. It's a homegrown, it's a guy that just does good work and, puts it out there. And if you can support him, you really should, because he's precisely a guy who can't, his banners may not be able to hang on the UFC because he hasn't been able to pay them $100,000 to get his stuff out there. That's the corporate stuff that we're talking about now with the UFC, that, they've made everything at that level where it's all about money for them. And Live to Fight is a dude that does good work, makes you a great banner, and, doesn't have $100,000 to get on the UFC and stuff, and deserves support. So any fighter out there, anybody out there, owner of a gym or anything like that listens to us, God bless you, and thank you very much for your support. And, extend that to Live to Fight, because he's one of us. Those guys are one of us.